Well, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, on behalf of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs and the co-organizers of this event, I'm very honored to welcome you all, and in particular our panelists and experts who have traveled to Geneva to this event on the topic of the protection of water during armed conflict. The protection of water as a vital resource is paramount at all times. Armed conflicts affect fresh water in several ways: destruction and damage to water facilities, attack against power plants providing water supplies, and the collapse of water treatment and sewage systems are some of these aspects. Moreover, continued hostilities and protracted armed conflicts may undermine the effort to repair, maintain, and operate water pumping and treatment facilities. The collapse of water governance institutions is an additional dimension of the consequences of armed conflicts. Let me frame the challenges we face today. First, contemporary armed conflicts have seen an increase in attacks against water infrastructure. Those attacks, deliberated or not, have severe consequences on the environment and, most importantly, on the civilian population, especially on the most vulnerable groups, such as children. In 1994, an International Committee of the Red Cross expert meeting convened in Montreux affirmed that during an armed conflict, lack of access to safe water and public health problems stemming therefrom may kill as many people as bombs. More than 20 years later, things got worse. In 2015, an ICRC study found that 50 million people living in urban areas are affected by armed conflicts, where the populations are more vulnerable to disruptions of essential services. Second, water is not only a vulnerable resource in need of protection during armed conflict, but is also increasingly weaponized and plays a role in war strategies. This is not new. The strategic and military value of water has long been known, at least since 1503, when Leonardo da Vinci plotted with Machiavelli to divert the course of the Arno River in the war between Pisa and Florence. However, the use of water as a weapon in wars has attained new dimensions in the context of the increasingly protracted and urban nature of armed conflicts and the proliferation of actors, notably armed non-state actors. Those trends are particularly worrying, and we believe that they require firm political, institutional, legal, and technical answers. There is already a strong legal framework of international humanitarian law. The destruction of water infrastructure, the pollution of water resources, and the diversion of a river constitute a violation of international law. However, IHL is not the sole relevant framework, as we will hear in a moment from Professor Mara Tinino. There is a need to raise awareness and elaborate actions to prevent and reduce the negative impacts of armed conflicts on the access to water and sanitation services. In its 2017 report, A Matter of Survival, the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, co-convened by 15 countries, among which Switzerland, Slovenia, Costa Rica, and Senegal, has recommended strengthening respect for and implementation of international humanitarian law in relation to water. This means also monitoring the violations and taking the responsible accountable. I look forward to listening to Dr. Danilo Turk, chair of the high-level panel on awareness and actions. It is also important to increase the effectiveness of the efforts of humanitarian organizations, such as the ICRC, in delivering water supplies to civilian populations in armed conflicts and to support their cooperation with local actors. Closely related to these efforts, the rehabilitation of river systems and the repair of damaged water infrastructure should also constitute an integral part of the conversation on water and armed conflict. In conclusion, I welcome also the effort of UNICEF and the Geneva Water Hub, a global center of the University of Geneva, in contributing to these endeavors. As we will hear in a moment, both organizations have issued two important documents this summer. UNICEF with its report, Water Under Fire, Emergencies, Development and Peace in Fragile and Conflict-Affected Contexts, and the Geneva Water Hub with its Geneva list of principles on the protection of water infrastructure, which systematizes for the first time the main rules applicable to the protection of water infrastructure. We have here an opportunity to concretely work on the humanitarian development peace nexus, which links the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the UN Sustaining Peace Agenda, and the Secretary General Agenda for Humanity. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all fruitful discussions for tonight and a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these introductory remarks. My name is Sabina Stadler. I'm permanent representative of Slovenia here in Geneva, and I will be moderating this event. So we've heard from the introductory speech that water has always been a threat and threatened. So we have a lot to talk about. If we talk about natural disasters is one thing, but when we talk about the human factor is something that maybe we can do about. And the latter, of course, includes pollution, but we are here today to try to see the link, or actually how the water is a threat or threatened in the armed conflicts. So it is my big pleasure to introduce four distinguished panelists today. First, to my further left, I would like to introduce Dr. Danilo Türk, Professor of International Law and lead political advisor of the Geneva Water Hub. He is also the chairman of the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, which wrote the famous report, Matter of Survival, with the follow-up on the recommendations, and there is still more to be done. He also served as president of Slovenia from 2007 to 2012, and he was our first Slovenian ambassador to the United Nations in New York from 1992 to 2000. That includes our membership in the Security Council. Then he served also as a UN Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs from 2000 to 2005. Then I have a pleasure to introduce Dr. Mara Tinino here on my right. She is a reader of international law at the Faculty of Law and the Institute for Environmental Sciences at the University of Geneva. She is also the lead legal specialist of the Platform for International Water Law at the Geneva Water Hub. She holds a habilitation à diriger des recherches from the Faculty of Law of the University Jean Moulin Lyon 3 and a PhD from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies here in Geneva. She has been a visiting scholar at George Washington University School of Law in Washington, D.C., and she's a mother of this publication that you can actually get hold of there behind on the table. Then, on my further right, Christine Pirenne, who is leading now the humanitarian aid team of the Netherlands Foreign Ministry. Very welcome. Before taking up this position, she has worked in different areas of foreign policy and development cooperation. Her focus has been on human rights while working at the Netherlands Embassy in Beijing, on food security and private sector development while working at the Netherlands Embassy in Zambia and Mozambique, and also on climate change adaptation, being the lead negotiator for the EU on the agenda for the least developed countries. In order to better liaise with the private sector and its role in development, Christine has been seconded to Rabobank, where she worked in an advisory team for banks in developing countries to support investment in agriculture and improve access to financial services for the poor. Last but not least, to the very far left, we have Meritxell Relaño, who started her career in UNICEF in 1999 and has now joined the UNICEF Office of Emergency Programs as Deputy Director here in Geneva. She's just back from UNICEF Yemen, where for the last 3.5 years, she served as the UNICEF representative and the deputy representative in what is one of the most complex emergencies of recent times. She also served in Djibouti, in Gambia, in Mozambique, East Timor, Panama, and Colombia. And she holds a PhD from the Universidad del País Vasco, an MBA from the Escuela Europea de Estudios Universitarios y de Negocios in Spain, and a university degree from the University of Deusto, Spain. So I believe that we should now start with short presentations of our panelists. Each of these presentation should touch upon different levels, different angles of the issue, from the global big picture to the local experience from the very field. And then maybe I could also ask the panelists to present us their view or their vision, what more could be done in the field of protection of water in the armed conflicts. After this presentation, then, of course, we will open the floor and you will have opportunity to ask questions. So if we start from kind of a more global perspective, I would then turn to Dr. Türk. And maybe you could please tell us or share your thoughts on the role of water as an instrument of peace, and if this is also true when we talk about water in conflicts.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to say that it is a great pleasure to be part of this panel, because the composition of the panel and specific angles that we are about to explore tell us a great deal about the practical problems affecting water in armed conflicts. And my role in this context is really very modest, because what I plan to tell you is about the experience we had with the preparation of the panel report, the panel's Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, which, as you know, produced a report called The Matter of Survival. We have a few copies there at the back of this room, for those who may have not seen it. But I guess by now most of you have at least heard about it, perhaps even seen it. And you will see that a very important chapter, Chapter 2, deals with water issues during armed conflicts. Now, I'm not going to recite what is there, what is in the report, because you can check on that. What I would like to do is, I would like to tell you a little bit about our experience in the preparation of the report, in the follow-up to the report, relating to the whole question of dealing with water issues in armed conflicts. In the preparation of the report, one of the things that we did, we went to New York to the Security Council and had a specialized meeting, which was a formal meeting of the Security Council with council members plus about 50 other member states presented. And we discussed the issues from the point of view of the practice and the practical needs of the Security Council. And one of the ideas that came in that discussion, it did not come from panel members, but from one of the permanent members of the Security Council, was that the Council should encourage what they call water supply ceasefires during armed conflicts, and inclusion of water issues and water cooperation in peace agreements. Now, inclusion of water clauses in peace agreements is not an innovation. It has been done before for hundreds of years, but water ceasefires are different. They are not formal. They have also taken place. The fact that the Security Council showed readiness to support this kind of approach is significant, and we were encouraged by the atmosphere in the Council, which was really favorable to dealing with water issues during armed conflicts. We then talked to UNICEF, and we realized that UNICEF has accumulated a very important experience in recent armed conflicts, which were largely in urban areas, where any attack on water infrastructure has huge effects that last very long and go much beyond the immediate area of attack. Now, if we look at these practices and these problems that have arisen, and at the same time an expression of willingness by the Security Council to develop policy trying to be meaningful, then we have to ask ourselves, well, is it really enough to have all these expressions of understanding of the problem and a certain degree of goodwill to do something about it? Should we do something more? And obviously, in that latter context, it was realized that it's important to systematize and explain the whole range of legal provisions that are relevant to these situations. Now, of course, everybody understands that humanitarian law, which is based on the idea of protection of civilians in armed conflicts and on principles such as proportionality of armed force, distinction between civilian and military objectives, and so forth, provides a framework. But we needed a more systematic approach, and the Geneva list of principles on protection of water infrastructure was that. Then we also realized that it is important not to let the humanitarian NGOs, which do most of the work, most of the practical work relating to water and armed conflicts alone. And obviously, what UNICEF has been doing recently was very valuable. I mean, the first report on water under fire really moved the discussion forward, and the next report, which is expected sometime early next year, will be a further step forward. At the same time, UNICEF and ICRC and other agencies that have practical experience should, in my opinion, do their utmost to make the problem understood, because it is still not properly understood, and further work in that regard is necessary. Now, in our report, we also advocated the idea of using the resources of member states of the United Nations for water infrastructure better. That means, among other things, in the situations of peacekeeping operations, and in particular in post-conflict peace building, to bring water specialists sufficiently early to the picture and use what is called the global field support strategy that exists in the United Nations to bring the work of experts and people who can develop or protect water infrastructure into the post-conflict peace-building operations. Now, these are some of the fragments which show the nature of our work with regard to a problem which is at the same time very old, using water as a weapon of war or as an object of attack, and obviously very new, because urban warfare is becoming more and more prominent problem. Water has been figuring very prominently in several armed conflicts of recent times, including Darfur, including Syria, including Iraq, very importantly Yemen, which doesn't have any surface water, so everything is underground and everything is very vulnerable. Now, in this sort of situation, further work in all these directions that I mentioned is necessary. Let me conclude. I don't think that we are at a stage when we can propose something very coherent in terms of policy to be followed by the Security Council. The Security Council has its own political problems which make it less effective than we would like. That's one aspect. Now, the other aspect is that all the relevant experience with water in armed conflicts is not yet sufficiently articulated, and we have to do more, and I hope that this panel will help in that regard. The whole discussion is ongoing. Many of you may know that yesterday the Security Council had an ARIA formula, that is an informal meeting, in which they discussed the protection of environment in armed conflicts. Now, of course, that's a different subject from the one that we are discussing today, but there are certain common points here. Data sharing, for example, monitoring. Monitoring is also advocated very strongly in the Geneva list of principles. So we see progress happening. But once again, and in conclusion, we need clearer articulation of problems that we see, more dramatic articulation because they are not sufficiently recognized, and then obviously a consistent pressure on policymakers, including on the Security Council, to develop policy that would make a difference. This is what I could say by way of introduction, but of course we can discuss that in some more detail later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Türk. As you said, the discussions are happening and the progress is happening. But maybe I turn now to Mara, and from this academic, more kind of point of view, are the discussions in the kind of a legal circles also happening, or are they fast enough? As a scholar kind of focused on water peace and international law, could you tell us what are the latest developments as far as the protection of water during and maybe also after the conflict is concerned?
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. I played a little bit a double role as a co-organizer and a panelist. So I would like to start saying that the Geneva List of Principles, it is a collective work. So here there is ICRC with whom we work together on the list of principles, and also we work together with other academic institutions. And here I have Professor Michel Bottet, who participated in the workshop last December, where we discussed a draft principles, the draft list of principles on the protection of water infrastructure. So I would like to make mainly 2 points. So the first one was suggested by His Excellency Yannick Roulin about the interaction between international humanitarian law and other areas of international law. In particular, today it is the Human Rights Day. So I think it is also a very good day to talk about this area of international law that is complementary to international humanitarian law, in particular in the field of water. And I should say that I remember very well the first comment made by Professor Michel Bottet saying that one of the first principles of the Geneva List should be on the human right to water. And I remember this remark. Indeed, no, the third principle of the Geneva List, it is on the human rights to water and sanitation. So I think that in the field of water, we can see really it is a complementarity between the two areas of international law. And also another particularity of this document of the Geneva List, it is that we take a comprehensive approach on the cycle of armed conflict. And in this sense, we follow the work of the International Law Commission on the draft principles on the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict, that it has this comprehensive approach of before, during, and after armed conflict. So, of course, the list focus on water infrastructure, on water and sanitation health services, and hygiene services, sorry, but also it includes a principle on the protection of the environment linked to the damage to water and water-related infrastructure. And also another aspect of the list, it is the preventive approach. In this context, I would like to mention the initiative of the Water and Peace and Security Partnership that it used this, not just last week, it was presented, this initiative about the use of a monitoring tool for the prevention of water conflict. So the Geneva List also, it has this aspect from also the International Law Commission of before, during, and armed conflict. And so the I would like to conclude saying that as an academic, I think that what brings the academia, it is not this convening power that we had, for example, last December for this workshop on the Geneva List of Principles, where we were able to facilitate this conversation about the drafting of a comprehensive document on the law applicable to water and water-related infrastructure. So, and also, I think that we were able to start this approach to link the urban welfare and the protection of the environment. Of course, it is only the beginning, and no, there is no, we include only one provision, but it is an aspect that we included in this document through this academic, through the convening power of the academia and the Geneva Water Hub, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. Let's move now to the state perspective. And maybe a question, Christine, to you would be, how does the protection of water facilities and access to water really kind of a profile, or how it is factored into your policies when we talk about humanitarian aid and, moreover, the very famous new nexus, humanitarian development security?
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. Let me start by sharing two experiences I had traveling in Yemen in 2016. We were there together with a Swedish and another Dutch colleague on a technical mission to just observe what is happening. And there were two cases. One was a project by Oxfam for a place where some 100 families of IDPs were gathered together. It was relatively near to a village in Yemen. The IDPs were not at all welcomed on that particular spot, but Oxfam wanted to take care and provided a water tank for them to get their access to water. But the water tank was shot at, so it leaked, could not be used, was basically ruined by the village people not too far from the place of where the IDPs were living, basically because they didn't want to have them anywhere near, and they hoped that by just shooting at the tank, it would make their life even more difficult. Another example is that we went to visit a scene not too far from Sana'a, where there was artillery placed upon a water tank. And the water tank was providing, I think, part of access to water for the city of Sana'a. The artillery was shot at because it's, by the opposing party, and obviously hit crucial infrastructure for a group of people living in Sana'a. Those two examples I will never forget. And it shows immediately why it is important that we talk about access to water in a conflict area. So why this issue matters is because it has a direct impact on physical but also mental well-being of people. Now, the question that you were also raised, what is it that governments can do? How can we give this profile? And here the Dutch government is trying really strong, not only on water, but also on starving people, is to bring these issues to the political table, to bring them to the Security Council. To make sure that there is text in resolutions, and even although it is not exactly the same issue, but it is somehow also connected. We were able to negotiate a resolution in the Security Council on criminalizing starvation as an infringement of international humanitarian law. That doesn't necessarily lead to a better situation of those IDPs that I saw in Yemen, but it gives a really strong compass to say this is not acceptable. And I think that is where we as governments, but even more our politicians, have a very important role to play. So that is one thing that we can do as states. Another thing that we can do as states, which is more operational, and you referred to it, is indeed trying to see what is coming in advance. So indeed, the tool that was launched a week ago here in Geneva by our Minister of International Trade and Development Cooperation was an early warning tool where we try to connect data, data on water, but also socioeconomic data and also political data. Connect those and try to make the analysis in an early stage to see where action might be needed. It is data. I think it also uses some sort of mechanic thinking, the AI tool, which of course is very useful, but I think it is always also important, and also taking from other events that are taking place here, is that we always have to have the human brain engaged. So the data is important. Putting it in a tool with artificial intelligence is important as well, but people must remain thoughtful and keep thinking themselves when or when not to act. So that is a second item. You also referred a little bit to the nexus. I think here it is actually quite interesting that we have the climate conference and this conference going on at the same time. And of course, you know, managing and being prepared and adapt to changes in the climate is also strongly linked to the suffering and grief of people. So what we do here is connected very much to what is happening in Madrid, but at the same time, the worlds don't really communicate very well. So talking about the nexus, maybe I just take one bit, climate and humanitarian aid. The nexus is, of course, a huge container where you can think of many different things. But it would be really good if we can connect and indeed learn more from what is happening in one fora and another, not to duplicate, but for us to also bring the grief of people suffering from droughts more stronger also to the climate change table. It's obviously there, but it could be done better. So that's what I would like to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. And this was a very, very good introduction into what is actually going on in the field. So I turn to Marichel, who is a field champion. She's the one who really dedicated her life to work with those who suffer the most on the very spots of crisis and conflict. So why don't you share with us some of your latest experiences and maybe your vision or your recommendations how to improve what we try to do?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting UNICEF to this panel. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And in the context of human rights, as you mentioned, the right to water and sanitation is an essential part of the Convention of the Right of the Child, and the right to water is as important as the right to food, to protection, to health, etc. But we are in very difficult times. More than 2 billion people live now in countries either in conflict or in fragile environments, affected by climate in some cases. The number of crises now that require response from international partners is around 30 crises, and there are more than 50 million people that are displaced or refugees, etc. So it's a complicated situation where from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, passing by Syria, Yemen, etc., the crises are becoming protracted, and this is threatening water and sanitation systems in rural and urban areas. And we're talking about the whole spectrum, from the extraction of the water to the distribution of the water. We're talking about sanitation also, and the cleaning of the water in order to sending it back to the network. So we have observed the appalling reality of the use of water and sanitation services as tactics of warfare. So, and attacks of water and sanitation are attacks on children. So I personally have experienced the same as our colleagues mentioned, attacks on water and sanitation facilities in different ways. So I remember in Sada, in the north of the country, where donors had very kindly given us funds to build. It was a water facility to extract water for, and I think it were two villages with all the pipe work, with all the solar panels. It was an innovation also because, as you know, Yemen is deficient in fuel. Anyway, we managed to build all this infrastructure for almost 100,000 people, and it was attacked. So then it had to be rebuilt again. So more than 100,000 people were without water for weeks until we got all the replacement, taking it to this area. And there were other ways also of indirectly affecting the water system. For example, the water treatment plant in Sana that you might have visited ensured clean water to, I mean, the water was clean when it was going back to the city. And because of lack of fuel, this waste treatment plant had to be stopped in several times including during cholera times. Imagine the effect of this. So if a party to the conflict does not allow the fuel to come into the country, this has a direct effect on the production of water, at least it had in the case of Yemen. So interesting the mention of the principle of proportionality. No? It seems innocent. I'm not bringing fuel into the country, but the impact of not bringing fuel into the country was massive in terms of the production of water in this case. So for us in UNICEF, WASH interventions are at the core of the organization, not only for the emergency response, but also for longer-term durable WASH solutions. So UNICEF works, as you asked me, at the global level. We are the leading the global WASH cluster, and it's a platform for all the partners in WASH to work together. Now present actually in more than 29 countries. In 29 countries there is a WASH cluster that is active and led by UNICEF. But at the implementation level, as you mentioned, indeed, UNICEF and ICRC and other partners, we have been working together to reach people with emergency water supply through direct or indirect interventions. So last year, UNICEF reached more than 43 million people, some of them with durable water supply systems, and some of them, the majority of them, through water tracking and other temporary measures. And this is, again, another part of the debate. What is more important, to invest in water tracking that is very expensive or in durable solutions? Sometimes donors don't want to invest in durable solutions during conflicts, but I think is the right place to go. And of course, emergency sanitation services, etc. So, for example, in Yemen, and you asked me to elaborate a bit more, being one of the main emergencies right now with more than 24 million people in need of support, more than 17 million people in urgent need of safe water, the population is obviously at risk of waterborne diseases, including cholera, diphtheria, etc., etc. So last year, UNICEF and partners provided an integrated cholera response, including health elements, of course, and prevention of hygiene measures, etc. So what we had was based on data from actually the British meteorological system and some other partners, we knew more or less where the rain was going to fall, and using those rain patterns, we would send rapid response teams to those areas to go immediately with the hygiene kits, the household water treatment tablets, and hygiene awareness sessions. And with this support, and together with the cholera vaccine, it wasn't the only intervention, we reached more or less 5 million Yemenis. And I think, there is no evidence, maybe scientific evidence, but we think that all these activities contributed to curbing one of the largest cholera acute watery diarrhea outbreaks ever by helping to reduce the number of suspected new cases. In 2017, it was from more than 1 million to 370,000 in 2018. So I think this was one of those interventions. In the Syrian Arab Republic, for example, UNICEF is tracking water and distributing emergency hygiene kits to people in urban conflict zone, but building the capacities of local institutions so that the systems can continue to function over the long term and reduce the need for this expensive tracking of water supply. So this is a partnership, for example, between the Ministry of Water Resources, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and private sector partners. And here, the involvement of the private sector is very important. We also had a very good experience in Yemen trying to support the private sector who was providing the water with technologies, with advice, with ways of improving the technology so that the water provided was clean. And we have also more examples from South Sudan and some other places. But I think that those are some initial thoughts for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marichal. So we heard from two different angles, from more kind of a global to more kind of, say, focused on national policies, from academic to actually from the field. And I thank the distinguished panelists for this presentation. So now it's up to you. Now we have some time for actually some thoughts for some actual experiences that you can share with us, for different kind of recommendations if you have for us, and of course for questions. There will be microphones available. Just please raise your hand and please present yourself when you ask a question or you make an intervention. Who would like to start?
Thank you very much, Vasilka Sancin from Slovenia. Several panelists have made this connection between the international humanitarian law and the human rights law, which certainly plays a role when we are dealing with protection of individuals in situations of armed conflicts. But nobody really mentioned, I think, very important recent development, and that is the General Comment 36 of the Human Rights Committee, which specifically makes this reference to the obligation of actually states parties to ensure access to, including also water, in order to fulfill their right to life, the protection of the right to life. So I think since this is a non-derogable right, even in situations of emergencies, including armed conflicts, I think this offers really an opportunity for continuous constructive dialogue with all the states parties to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as for litigation, basically, in domestic courts, because as we know, I mean, the right to water as such, although gaining in importance, is not yet universally accepted, although Slovenia is among those states that have included it in its constitution recently. So I was wondering what the distinguished panelists think about this, actually a progressive thinking of the Human Rights Committee when it comes to ensuring right of life and actually living in dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we collect a couple more questions. If anyone? Okay. Gentleman there.
Merci beaucoup. Moi, c'est Serge Natiori. Je suis du Burkina Faso et je suis chef d'un projet WASH et avec la Croix-Rouge burkinabé en partenariat avec le CICR. Et avec l'UNICEF, on a également d'autres programmes WASH au profit des IDPs. Et, bon, j'étais de passage, je ne savais pas qu'il y avait une rencontre ici. Et juste quand j'ai vu protection des infrastructures d'eau dans les situations de conflit, j'ai dit qu'il fallait que je participe. Voilà, merci. Et présentement, nous faisons face à une situation sans précédent de conflit armé qui sévit dans le pays. Et le fait que ces gens, ces porteurs d'armes non identifiés, attaquent partout, ils sont invisibles, ils apparaissent, ils disparaissent, fait qu'il y a beaucoup de mouvements de population. Donc le nombre d'IDPs a plus que triplé. C'est-à-dire que nous sommes à près de 6 000 déplacés, plus de 6 000 déplacés internes dans le pays. Et donc, nous avons des sites officiels qui sont là. Et aussi, il y a des déplacés dans les milieux urbains. Maintenant, la situation que nous voyons présentement, c'est que les menaces font que le personnel qui est dans ces milieux urbains, qui font le traitement de l'eau pour que la population puisse avoir, lorsque il y a des menaces, ils disparaissent. Donc, au niveau des soins de santé, je pense qu'avec le CICR, on a déjà travaillé à mieux renforcer notre présence à travers un centre de santé que nous avons sur place. Mais au niveau de l'eau, nous sommes toujours en train de réfléchir sur comment, même s'il arrivait que le personnel de l'État qui est sur place arrivait à partir parce qu'on a assisté à un scénario qui n'est pas facile à dire, où la police locale a plié bagages et a quitté. Il reste seulement l'armée qui est là avec un détachement militaire et la gendarmerie. C'est d'ici la police a pu partir. Imaginez la peur que les gens vont faire. Et donc, beaucoup d'agents sont en train de quitter. Donc, une fois que tous ces gens partent, comment on va pouvoir desservir l'eau à cette communauté? Tout le monde ne peut pas quitter cette grande ville. Ce n'est pas l'unique ville, mais il y en a beaucoup. C'est la ville la plus touchée. Alors, c'est vrai que nous, sur place, on réalise de nouveaux forages. L'eau souterraine, on perfore voilà, et on desserve l'eau, voilà, pour qu'il y ait encore plus de possibilités. Mais sachant qu'il y a des moments où ces eaux-là peuvent tarir, voilà, ces forages peuvent ne plus donner. Et l'idée, ce n'est pas de perforer partout. Donc, si on a un qui a un très bon débit, on peut en faire voilà, un AEPS, adduction d'eau, pour pouvoir desservir plusieurs zones. Parce qu'à force de faire, voilà, il y a des zones qu'on n'arrive même plus à envoyer des machines pour faire l'eau, en fait. Parce que moi, j'ai envoyé une machine pour réaliser un forage au profit d'une communauté où je ne peux même plus avoir accès. On a traité avec les communautés locaux, des gens qui sont là-bas, qui peuvent avoir accès et qui sont arrivés. Et ils ont reçu une visite. Ils les ont demandé qu'est-ce que vous êtes venu faire. Et voilà, dès qu'ils sont repartis, le chauffeur a dit qu'il ne peut plus travailler, il faut qu'il lui rentre. Et voilà, la communauté n'a pas bénéficié de ce forage. Et donc, c'est vrai, il y a des politiques, le droit à l'eau, voilà, les forces armées sont sensibilisées à ça, ainsi de suite, ils ne touchent pas aux infrastructures liées à l'eau. Mais ces groupes armés non identifiés, voilà, ils ne font pas la différence, ils attaquent. Et donc, pas très loin de là-bas, nos éléments nous ont rapporté que du fait que l'armée vient se ravitailler, c'est à 100 km de la ville où on est, et du fait que l'armée vient se ravitailler là-bas aussi pour partir, a amené des groupes armés, des personnes non identifiées, venir attaquer le point d'eau, de telle sorte parce qu'ils ne veulent pas voir un corps habillé venir se ravitailler. Vous voyez ce que ça fait donc. Quelle action envers ces genres de personnes? Parce que nous, on ne peut pas en tant que mouvement Croix-Rouge, mais qu'est-ce que le gouvernement peut faire? Qu'est-ce que le système, le professeur a parlé des Nations Unies, quelle force on peut avoir pour que ces individus-là puissent, en tout cas, connaître notre mandat, ça c'est de un, et aussi savoir que ces infrastructures sont protégées. Voilà, c'est vrai qu'avec les CIC, on fait le DIH, le droit à l'eau. On arrive, s'ils arrivent à entrer peut-être en contact avec eux, les sensibilisent, mais ce n'est pas toujours suffisant. Voilà. Donc, voici ce que je voulais partager comme expérience et poser comme question. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Il y a des autres questions? Peut-être la troisième question. Third question, maybe? And then we will give the floor back to the panelists. Okay, the lady there in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Adriana Solana from Costa Rica, from the government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We always think about when we have the conflict, but what about the prevention relating to water and also the infrastructure of water in the countries where there's no apparently conflict, but you can have conflict anytime? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, dear panelists, shall we start?
You want me to start?
You start. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think that the two questions were a bit interrelated because you did mention accountability, let's say, to conventions, to the laws, etc. But you only mentioned the states. And our colleague from Burkina Faso, where I was actually 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago with emergency director's mission, so I was there actually getting to know the situation in Burkina Faso, is talking about non-state actors. So I don't know if those laws, I mean, the law should apply to everyone, but how do you make the non-state actors comply with the law? And in the case of Yemen, the de facto authorities were not recognized by any government, and the government of Yemen was in exile, let's put it like this. So this is a very, very interesting question that I really don't have the answer, but how do we make accountable the non-state actors? In the case of Burkina, as you very well mentioned, more than 500,000 people have been displaced. The UN has declared already an L3 emergency. The clusters have been activated, including the WASH cluster, and more resources are coming for all the UN to respond to this humanitarian crisis. It's one of the crises that we are not talking about, but is getting bigger as we speak. As I say, 500,000 people already displaced. This is a huge number. And the country, I mean, let's say the UN agencies in the country, they are not prepared for this, because this was a context of development that suddenly needs to switch to a humanitarian response. So this is a very, very important point that you are making. And in terms of access, you also responded to yourself. I mean, the UN agencies have access through the local NGOs, but at some point, and in the case of Burkina, they don't even have access anymore. So this is one of the major problems. So in Burkina, for example, 2,000 schools are closed at this point in time. More than 67 health centers are also closed. And of course, we cannot reach those water distribution points in order to repair them or to provide water, etc. So we can only provide the water to the displaced population when they come to areas where they are accessible. So very, very important questions that you mentioned.
Now, there are questions of action which relate to accountability and others that do not relate to accountability. And one needs both. I mean, it's not that accountability is a formula which will work in all situations. I'd like to mention that as an advisor to Geneva Water Hub, I'm very pleased that we have looked at the question of Sahel in a more comprehensive way. And here I see François Minger, who is the president of Geneva Water Hub, who can tell us more about the entirety of the approach that we need to develop in that regard. Of course, nothing really works well in that regard. Military action, the UN assistance, the question of how to relate water issues during the armed conflicts to a peaceful vision of development for the future. How does one relate that to the social structures which are specific? And of course, outside the reach of the United Nations or governments in most cases. So maybe Francois would have to be able to tell us a little bit more about the diversity of the situation and the approaches that are contemplated. Now, in the work of our panel, we have noticed that there are certain ways of working with the non-state actors which are not based on the idea of accountability, but simply on the idea of bringing them into a discussion and trying to persuade them to respect humanitarian law. This may look a bit optimistic, but there is an initiative called Geneva Call, which was fairly effective, and I think that that's worth exploring further. It's not based on the idea of accountability, it's based on the idea of cooperation. Now, I understand that during this conference earlier today, there was a discussion how to engage non-state actors. It's a huge problem, and non-accountability-based approaches have to be developed further. Geneva Call, deeds of commitment, and similar techniques should be developed as much as possible and should be supported by intergovernmental actors. So that's on that subject. And then, of course, there is a different area which is accountability based, where states come in, and Professor Sansine asked about that. Now, I would like to see a well thought through case of litigation in this context. I mean, there might be a possibility to bring a case before a national court, or perhaps before ICC, or before some other judicial body. Of course, not everything can be, adequate, or not everything can be ready for such action, but we don't need to address every situation around the world. The most important thing would be to get a single case before a court and try a litigating approach based on laws which we have heard about even during our panel today. I have no specific proposal at this stage, but Mara would probably have more to say about this. And maybe, working together, we can figure out which case would be the closest to a litigation, of course, because that would be the most, the clearest way of bringing the idea of accountability into life. So this is another. So these are two approaches. Each of them is different, You can't apply them across the board, but you can think about cases where either of the two would work.
So, Maraj, the challenge was thrown to you.
Just I would like to clarify now that in the second additional protocol on non-international armed conflict, there are specific provisions so on the obligation of non-state actors in relation to the protection of objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, such as the water wells, irrigation works, and also in relation to the obligation of installation containing dangerous forces, meaning dams and dikes. And I think that just a few days ago, we had the amendment under the initiative of Switzerland about the inclusion of the crime of starvation as a crime of war during non-international armed conflict. So this is also can be an issue related not to the protection of the access to water. Regarding case litigation, and there is a case on Sudan that was brought before the African Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights that linked the destruction of water wells with human rights. And also, I think that the comment about the general comment number 36 on the right to water, on the right to life, it is a very important development regarding the protection of access to water also in this connection. And there are also other developments regarding, for example, the extraterritoriality of the right to life. So this is also an important aspect of this general comment. And regarding also what are the obligations of non-state actors in the case of the protection of the environment, there is a big differences in this context, because in the second additional protocol we don't have specific provision on the environment, but here we have Laurent Giselle that maybe could also say, share his thoughts about this. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, and you took the words out of my mouth, because also when it comes to accountability, and I mentioned this resolution on starvation as a crime, we are really, really encouraged by the fact that the Swiss, I think, proposed the amendment to the ICC statutes. I'm not a legal expert at all. But to make sure that prosecution of starvation in internal armed conflict is also recognized as a crime. So these are all sort of wow moments, because I do think that really matters. Geneva Call, you mentioned it also. I think it is also about behavior. Again, we have a law, but it is about how people behave. That's what I learned from the Red Cross movement as well. And I think the Red Cross movement has a role to play, because they are radically neutral and can talk to all parties by educating them. And that is what Geneva Call does too, to make sure how they act, how they behave, and when what they do is beyond what we agreed of rules that actually, even in war, you need to attach to. Maybe one issue, one last short comment on prevention, since that was raised as well. I think in at least the community of states, donors, the issue of prevention is strongly on the agenda. Maybe for the time being, at least within the humanitarian setting, we strongly focus on being earlier. Also, within UN OCHA, it is about anticipative finance. Can we be earlier with our funding, with our action, before the biggest suffering actually occurs? That is not yet prevention, but it's in this gray zone of how you can address the longer term solutions, acting earlier, reduce or increase, I must say, the resilience. And of course, in the end, it is to stop the fighting.
Thank you very much. That was a very, very strong thought. We're running out of time. So if there are any pertinent comments, questions, maybe we can allow one more. Otherwise, we will try to wrap up. Sure. Please, here, the gentleman in the front row.
Oh, thank you very much, Michel Vetter. Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. And I would like to say with His Excellency Daniel Türk that indeed it's not only the law, but it's also engaging. And not only engaging non-state actors, but also engaging states and convincing them to behave, to change their ways. And actually that water indeed is a fundamental human right, and water is shareable, and that it's also a common good of humankind. And we need, and actually I'm also member of the board of the Geneva Code, and I can tell you that indeed what's happening is that it's a constant search for contacts, for establishing trust, and then keeping them by their words. But after that, you need to monitor. You need to go to check to be sure that's understood. And if there are, because there will be violations, to try to correct that quietly, because actually the Geneva Code is not a court, and we don't have chapter 6 or 7 means of action. And that's why, and I think that's again the human factor. The human factor, how do women and men of goodwill try to convince people, try to also find some goodwill in even the worst people, or what appears to be the worst part of this humanity. But that's why, thank you very much for addressing this. And I think it's very much needed here in this conference that you address it not only legally, but also practically and also humanly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Well, I have a specific proposal after having to recognize my friend Michel Vetter. I mean, we were working together 30 years ago. Both of us were having less gray hair, and we didn't need glasses at that time. So, you know, it was a slightly different time. But now, you see, the way I see this whole discussion, we have again listed a number of fragments, which altogether are part of a big discussion where, you know, things are moving ahead, but not speedy enough. And this brings me to the question of prevention. And I would like to make the following specific proposal. Now, the European Union has adopted its conclusions of the European Council on Water Diplomacy. There was a conference in November in Brussels, which brought together a certain group of people trying to figure out what would be the priorities of water diplomacy for European Union. Now, European Union is an important institution, important also from the point of view of the United Nations and other global arrangements. And it consists of states that could do things. What is lacking now is a kind of an environment defined by non-governmental actors, people with specific experience, experts from the field work to try to help the European Union to develop meaningful and practical set of priorities. I'm saying this because the time for that is ripe now, and I think that our discussion this evening also shows that. I mean, we are really identifying a number of things that could be done, and they should be brought to into the mainstream of activity of European Union, because the European Union is ready to do that, and that assistance is needed. So I think that kind of approach could be very meaningful at this stage.
Thank you very much, Dr. Türk, for mentioning these council conclusions. Still in my previous life, before Geneva, we were working hardly on these conclusions, and I'm very happy that they actually saw the light and that they are actually some kind of guiding principles for the future EU action. But the water issue is much broader than the EU. And we will all still need to work on this issue. So I'm very glad that you participated tonight at this event. We all agree that water is indispensable and we need to protect it during armed conflicts, but also in a more kind of a broader sense. We don't need to be in an armed conflict that water is actually kind of in danger because of all the new threats, be it terrorism, mass urbanization, non-state actors mentioned, even the new technologies. I mean, no one can guarantee that our critical infrastructure is not hacked one day. So there is a strong appeal to increased action on water resilience in all parts of the world. And we can do it from different kind of angles. One is to increase dialogue, to increase awareness, and to continue promoting this issue to gain more attention. It doesn't need to be always the Security Council, but even there we try to sneak it through the back door and discuss it in the context of either regional conflicts or starvation, for example. On the other hand, we still need to work a lot on the legal framework. There is something solid already existing, but as we heard today, there is still an opportunity to do more. There is an opportunity for more kind of progressive thinking, but on the other hand, also this cooperation idea is something that we should focus on also. It's about behavior, it's about human factor we heard today. When we talk about development, humanitarian, security nexus, we should do more for the sake of prevention, because it prevents not just lives, but also saves money. So I think we can also agree that we have some important homework to do. As far as the early warning is concerned, more data collection is concerned, and better anticipation and forecasting is concerned. So I think that this is also something we can actually take away from today. Another interesting idea was that we should avoid duplication and we should improve the links on one hand between humanitarian development security, but on the other hand also what the international community is doing, international organizations, governments, NGOs, we all together. So I would like now to thank the organizers of this event. Then I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for their contributions and the time that they took to be with us. And of course, I thank you also to you, dear audience, for participation and for interesting questions. And with this, I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much.